Hey, I'm Keith from Banshee Bikes. I'm one of the owners and the designer of the Banshee bike range. I've been working for Banshee now since kind of the reinvention of the brand for about 4 years now. I've been working there. The Legend is designed to be a purebred race bike, and the test bike we had, the Mark 1, originally had two travel settings of 8.5 inches and 7 inches. After lots of feedback from the test riders, we had about 60 to 70 in total. Basically, they were all sitting in the 8.5 inch setting over the 7 because they felt the 7 was over damped with the 3-inch stroke shock. So they said, yeah, 8.5 is what they ran it in, but they wanted it to be slightly lower and a little bit less travel, so it was a bit more snappy out the gate and railed corners without really sagging to travel too much. So I settled for 8, which balances out with pretty much all downhill forks out there and seems to be really the industry standard and what most people want. The Legend Mark 1 was a pre-production, well, we had 4 different stages of prototypes for it, and then we did a whole pre-production run of 67 frames. From those frames we deducted a whole load of issues that we had. We originally were using bushings, which on a downhill bike they didn't really cut it, to be honest. We had a few problems with wear and axles, and also a lot of stiction, which obviously in a downhill bike, when you're looking to get traction and supple suspension performance, is not what you're looking for. So the Mark II switched to bearings running on titanium axles, high quality bearings, just deep groove roller bearings, or ball bearings, sorry, at every pivot. Large diameters to take the high loads. Adds a little bit of weight, but I saved weight elsewhere, so it cancelled out. Other than that, the changes we made from the Mark 1 to the Mark 2 are really just geometry tweaks, the travel tweaks, and really just refinements. The ideal customer for the Legend Mark II is going to be your downhill racer, but I'd say the Legend it's obviously a downhill bike, but also it's quite a tough bike, so it can cope with, you know, bike park riding, a whole season of that. It's not just a bike that's going to ding when hit by rocks or when you fall over. It's quite tough and abuse friendly, but it's focused in terms of geometry and travel and frame structure to be full-on downhill race bike, all about speed and control around hard corners and traction. The Legend Mark II is really designed to take on the world's toughest downhill courses. So, I mean, World Cup tracks are a prime example. The low centre of gravity really keeps it stable at high speed, but also means it's really easy to rail around corners. That combined with the frame stiffness means you'll really hold your line. Some frames can get a bit flexy in corners, so they become a bit unpredictable and maybe shoot out without you realising. The Legend is really, really stiff, and it will hold the line. It's a bit like if you're skiing. If you're a beginner, you'll get a flexy ski. If you're an expert, you'll get a stiff ski. It's the same sort of deal for the Legend for when it comes to racing. Just a stiff bike is really probably ideal for people who are riding hard, aggressive lines, and just ripping up the corners and maintaining speeds anywhere they can. Well, the suspension system for the Legend really, it came from a couple of things I wanted to get from the bike. First of all, I wanted it to have a very low centre of gravity, because obviously that helps you control the bike when cornering or through rough sections, just makes it feel more balanced and stable. Then I also wanted to get a nice rearward axle path, which meant that it didn't hang up in square edge hits and went through the chatter without really slowing down too much. And then using a virtual pivot, I could achieve both of these things, as well as having the suspension being independent from braking, so that it remained active even when you're braking with the rear wheel. So the short link 4-bar system that I used really was quite a good option for being able to fine-tune all these things, and really just probably the best option out there for this bike. The leverage in the Legend it's progressive to linear, but overall it's fairly linear. I originally had it on the Mark 1 as being much more progressive, so that you didn't go through the travel too quickly. But it turned out to be slightly too progressive with a lot of shocks, especially because it's got a 3-inch stroke shock which has got, you'll have good damping characteristics due to the low leverage ratio. So blowing through the travel definitely wasn't an issue. And by having a slightly more linear curve, it meant that you could sit in the travel more when ripping around corners, which gave you a bit more traction and control. And really it was rider feedback. A bunch of guys who are well established in the industry, who've ridden a lot of bikes, gave me good feedback on that, who really just said, well, we want a linear or a more linear leverage ratio because it makes it, or leverage curve, because it makes it easier to tune a shock to be exactly what you want when you've got all the high speed, low speed, compression, rebound options. The geometry of the Legend is full on race. It's low and slack with a 13.7 inch BB and a 63.8 degree head angle. Really, this was fine-tuning through different iterations of design and prototypes, taking into account rider feedback, personal testing, and just looking at really seeing where the market was going. The Legend Mark II does not have geometry adjustability, but the Mark I did. After speaking to all the riders, the over 60 riders that we had testing the Mark I, the guys, I spoke to them about geometry adjustment, and to be honest, none of them really wanted it. They said that they set it and forget it. They learned to ride the bike. As long as geometry was in the ballpark, they'd get used to the bike, and if they changed the geometry, it sometimes would upset the riding. Plus, I think the geometry that is selected for the Mark II is really, it's pretty much the ideal according to the feedback I got from these racers and testers from around the world. Well, the Mark II Legend has been, 5 years in the making. I know that some people won't believe that, or they think it's a waste of time, but through those 5 years we've carefully and calculatedly designed it so that it's been refined over time with lots and lots of testing. I mean, we had it under almost 70 riders for over a year before it was even released in the public. And there's not too many manufacturers out there that'll do that, let alone ones our size. I mean, we're only 3 guys that just work around the clock because we love bikes.